Hello, everyone. I'm Shoshana O'Keefe, council member for District 5, which includes neighborhoods in North Berkeley and also some of the Berkeley Hills. Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. It's really great to see so many people here interested in learning more about our fire department's Grizzly Peak project to remove hazardous vegetation from the public of way for better egress and ingress during emergencies.
And good evening. I'm Brent Blackaby, council member in District 6, just uphill from Shoshana. We share the Spruce Street border between our districts. Thank you for joining me tonight. I know we're all eager to hear from the fire department tonight about this really important project to remove hazardous fuels from the hills. But before we dive into the specific topic, we did want to just briefly take one step back. In the wake of the Southern California fires, we know that we all share real concerns, not only about those tragically affected in Los Angeles County, but also about our own community and the impacts a similar tragedy would have here in Berkeley. So Shoshana and I want to assure you that the city of Berkeley has been hard at work for the last several years to prepare for wildfires and other emergencies, making us safer and more resilient should one occur. But we all know we still have much more to do. Shoshana and I and our teams have been meeting with Chief Sprague and leaders of the Berkeley Fire Department on a daily basis for the past 3 weeks to escalate this work. The City Council has scheduled a special meeting on the wildfire threat on February 11th, and we'll be reviewing proposals from the Berkeley Fire Department to step up our preparedness efforts beyond the work that's already been done. And there has been much work that's already been done. So what we're talking about tonight is one important piece among many other efforts underway and soon to be underway. It's going to take all together, the fire department, our partners in the East Bay Regional Park District, East Bay MUD, UC Berkeley, neighboring jurisdictions, and individual residents like each of us to address the threat. And I want to thank Chief Sprague and the fire department for really leading the charge. We're so lucky to have them here. After tonight's presentation, we'll take questions. You can type them into the Zoom Q&A at any time. Assistant Chief Pinto will be reading them and pull together key questions that reflect the content of the most common questions. There'll also be time for some verbal questions, which you can ask by clicking the Zoom hand icon, and we'll remind you about all this at that time.
Great. Thank you, Brent. And, I just want to acknowledge this is a deeply personal issue for many of you. It has to do with your homes, your lives, the lives of your loved ones. And I know that you know that this work is deeply personal for both me and I want you to know this is deeply personal for me and Brent as well. Speaking for myself, I grew up actually in Brent's district. My parents still live in the home I grew up in on Keeler, and they're in their 80s. And I thought about them a lot when I watched the coverage of the LA fires. Fortunately, we are lucky to have one of the most sophisticated, well-equipped, and prepared fire departments in California. I'm not kidding. That said, we know nothing could have prepared LA for the scale of destruction and devastation that they experienced. And so we definitely have our work cut out for us. So it's going to take our collective effort and it will require some sacrifice. But if anyone can do it, it's Berkeley. We have an incredible community here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Colin Arnold, who's the interim assistant fire chief for the Wildland Urban Interface Division at the Berkeley Fire Department. And Chief Arnold will lead tonight's webinar. Colin?
Thank you very much, everybody. Can you hear me and see my screen all right?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Council members, really well said. I think we're really excited about this project. I'd also like to say that this project has been years in the making, and to your point, this is ongoing work. It just happens to come after a really challenging time for California. But this is absolutely one example of what we're doing going forward. So we're really excited to bring it to you tonight. This has been a multi-year effort to reduce fire risk to the community by mitigating fuel risk on public lands. So with that said, I'm going to crack right into this thing here. So the grant's been funded by the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, which is commonly known as CAL FIRE, and they have a wildfire prevention grants program. And it's a multi-agency effort. It's a collaboration between East Bay Municipal Utilities District, UC Berkeley, us here at the Berkeley Fire Department, and the East Bay Regional Parks District. Each agency is responsible for a different but related scope of this project. In 2025, we're focusing on removing dead and dying vegetation that is most likely to ignite, and we're creating a fuel break between the remaining vegetation. This helps prevent fire from spreading as quickly and ensures that evacuation routes away from Grizzly Peak will remain clear in the event that residents must evacuate quickly. To complement the work project partners are doing along Grizzly Peak Boulevard, the city of Berkeley will also clear vegetation and debris that obstructs potential access, egress, and evacuation routes into and out of the city. Work in Berkeley includes treatments along the roadway at the wildland urban interface within the city that could prevent emergency access or egress to the upper parts of Grizzly Peak Boulevard during a fire and provide multiple options for evacuation routes. It'll remove combustible and hazardous vegetation in the public right-of-way, which is a term we'll hear often tonight, within 10 feet of roadways. So here's an example of the work that East Bay Parks has done under this project. This is Golf Course Drive. If you've driven down South Park Drive recently, you'll see more of the work there. When you look at this photo, you can see the difference from where it started on the left to what was finished on the right. And obviously, you'll see a substantial fuel break and more basically clear air between the vegetation on either side of the road, using the road as a natural opportunity, or at least human-made opportunity, to create separation between fuels. So here's what the project looks like as a whole. The goal is to create a fuel break where feasible to help slow the spread of a fire from the east, which is the scenario we're the most worried about. If you've driven down Grizzly Peak into Oakland recently, you've seen the results of this project off either side of the road near the park. And of course, as I mentioned on South Park Drive, that one was completed in the last few months. There's also more work coming from our partners in the region this coming year. Here's the exact same scope of work, but it's showing who's responsible for each area of work. So on a good day, there's many places along our roads where vegetation encroaches on the roadway and makes passage difficult. What you're looking at here is a couple of photos. We just drove behind one of the engines one day on their way back from a call, and this is an example of the challenges they face. If you can imagine a line of cars trying to evacuate in the other direction, there's many places on our roads where fire apparatus trying to get to the scene and residents trying to get out would create a traffic jam, and nobody would get to go where they desperately need to go. So I'd like you to take a look at this vegetation and then imagine that some of that same vegetation was on fire. And in fact, you don't actually have to imagine it. This is a video shot by some of our folks here in Berkeley during the Tubbs fire as they were trying to assist residents out of an area that was already quite a bit more open than what you just saw in the photos. It's important to pause for a moment and look at one section of that video more closely, right there. This is a road with a full bike lane, with fire pushing the responding vehicles and the people that they're trying to evacuate into the oncoming lane to get through. So our goal with this project is to eliminate this possibility as much as possible by targeting opportunities to address the risk without altering any more than necessary what we all love about the Berkeley Hills, which is the intertwining of nature and homes. So let's look specifically at the city of Berkeley work. This is going to involve 110 acres along 40 miles of road. We've targeted east-west streets where we can take advantage of existing fuel breaks in the form of roads, and also where we have public access. And then we've also included roads that move from east to west. So we've got the north-south running streets that allow east-west stoppage of fire, and then the east-west running streets, which would be primary evacuation routes. The work's going to start along Wildcat Canyon Road, and that work's going to start on February 17th. And then from there, the work will transition over to Grizzly Peak Boulevard. That's phase one. The following phase will be most of the roads between Wildcat Canyon and Grizzly Peak Boulevard. And after that, it's Marin Ave and the La Loma corridor and Park Hills. And then the next phase is Euclid and Spruce. And then finally, the Arlington. We specifically triage streets by severity and risk and opportunity, and we anticipated that we would run out of money. So we picked more streets than we believe we have the funding for because we wanted to use every dollar that we had. And we'll continue doing the work in this order until the funds are exhausted. And that'll depend on how much vegetation gets removed and how quickly the crew can move through the community. So all of this work is going to take place within the public right of way. So the first question is, what is the public right of way? And in some areas, it's just simply the edge of the street. But in most of our areas, it extends beyond the edge. It usually encompasses sidewalks, utility poles, utility covers. So we're looking here at an example of what the right of way is in relation to the center line of the street. Here we're looking at an example from Grizzly Peak Boulevard, where the road itself is only 36 feet wide, but the right of way is actually 70 feet. So that includes about 17 feet on either side of the improved road. As we're all likely familiar with this road, this explains the sidewalks, the fire hydrants, the utility covers, the telephone poles. All of these are examples of things that are included inside the right of way. So when you're walking down your street, when you see these things beside the street, that's a sign that the right of way of the street actually extends beyond where some of the vegetation might be. And so while some residents will be glad to see this work extend beyond the edge of the street, I think others have really taken ownership of that area in front of their sidewalk, and this project may be a sensitive subject, especially when there's fire hazardous plants involved. So in many cases, we're simply pruning live material, removing dead material, and cleaning up the area. But we will be removing certain fire hazardous vegetation. So the next question is, what is fire hazardous vegetation? So this is vegetation that typically shares one or more of these characteristics. It may be biologically prone to burn due to chemical composition, which often means it contains volatile oils. It may be difficult to maintain. It may have a surface area prone to fire, or it may tend to rapidly adapt to the surrounding air moisture, which as firefighters we call 1 hour or light flashy fuels. And the most hazardous of vegetation that we're going to see actually contains all of these characteristics. Fire Safe Marin actually maintains an excellent list of hazardous species and why they're hazardous. They're down there at the bottom, firesafemarin.org. I'd highly recommend going over and taking a look at some of the work that they've done. It's really exceptional, and it's a great introduction to the way we approach this work. So the scope that we've delivered to the contractor includes 19 actions, and I'd like to believe that we all would support the removal of dead vegetation and leaves. So I'd like to take some time to focus on the areas that might cause some consternation in the community. So first of all, access limitations. We are avoiding any areas where we might violate privacy rights. This includes fences, vegetation that might be used as a screen, even if those things exist in what we believe to be the public right of way. In cases such as what you see here in the photo, you'll see us trim up the outside edge of this hedge to address the encroachment issue as best we can, but we won't otherwise drastically alter that vegetation. With that said, wooden fences, hedges, and other improvements being used for privacy that would impede public access during a wildfire will be geotagged and evaluated at a later date with appropriate city staff to determine if they actually do infringe on the public right of way. If they're on the public right of way, they'll be tagged as a violation during the next inspection season, and they'll need to be removed by the property owner at their own cost. So if you'd like to avoid this step, when we drop a door hanger on your door prior to the work, and I'll talk about what that communication looks here in a little bit, you'll have the opportunity to offer up essentially to have us remove the vegetation free of charge as a part of this program. For those that are interested in the rule, it's section 4906.5.5 of the fire code, and that talks about our responsibility to maintain vegetation within 10 feet of the roadway, regardless of whether it's on the public right of way, to make sure it's not a fire hazard. So again, as we come through, we'll be knocking on doors, dropping door hangers, letting you know ahead of time that the work's coming through your neighborhood, and there'll be a couple items on that door hanger to give you the opportunity to either give feedback or otherwise participate in the program. So moving on from those privacy hedges, grasses and weeds are examples of those light flashy fuels that rapidly assume the moisture content of the air. That's important because when we have humid days, those fuels tend to not burn as quickly. When we have those dry days that we're all really familiar with, those red flag high wind days, those ground fuels immediately release all of their moisture, become quite dry, and they become the most rapid transmitters of ground fire. As a side note, these types of fuels are the #1 cause of firefighter deaths in the wildland environment, is that light flashy fuel. So while it looks innocuous and it looks small, it actually can be quite dangerous. So tree pruning, one of the goals and one of the areas of scope is to prune and reduce ground vegetation from under trees to provide a vertical separation of 3 times of the height of the understory. To say that another way, when vegetation burns, especially under windy conditions, vegetation can burn 3 times the height of the plant. So if a plant is 2 feet tall, we need 6 feet of clearance in order to make sure that that plant doesn't readily ignite what's above it and transition the fire into the crown. For trees, this means limbing trees from the ground to 1/3 of their height, or 8 feet. And we'll provide horizontal separation of tree crowns where tree health allows it to happen. And that's usually 10 feet of separation on flat ground, 20 feet of separation on moderate slope, and 30 feet on a steep slope. We'll also be pruning back, and I think we may talk about this later, but we're also going to be pruning back to make sure that there's access to the road and that there's 13 feet, 6 inches of overhead clearance to make sure that fire apparatus and other vehicles can pass underneath. So in terms of trees, we generally do not remove mature, healthy trees, and this project is no exception. That's for 2 reasons. One, a well-maintained mature tree is generally pretty resilient to fire, and it does not usually contribute to fire spread as much as the invasive species that would otherwise move under the drip line of the tree if it was removed. The second part of this is it's quite difficult to remove mature trees with public money of any kind without triggering the California Environmental Quality Act. So here we have a Pride of Madera plant that has too much volume. It's extending into the road. This would likely produce lateral flame lengths that would be much more extreme than what we saw in that video from the Tubbs fire. Vegetation will produce under windy conditions flames, like I mentioned before, that are 3 times the size of the plant. So if you take this plant and you multiply it by 3 times, that's where you can expect flames to go. That absolutely impacts the roadway's ability to sustain travel for both evacuees and responders. So here we've got fire hydrant. One of the things that we need to do is maintain 3 feet of space around fire hydrants. That's a part of the fire code. We're also going to be clearing leaf litter, dead palm fronds, twigs, branches, logs, stumps, other dead vegetation from the roads and from the gutters. So we'll be pulling that back to give ourselves that separation. This was an example of both the fire hydrant, and we didn't quite catch it in there, but there's a gutter down there at the bottom. And on to maybe what might be the most difficult part of this presentation, although it's a short one, but it might be a bit painful for some folks. So here are some examples of cypress and rosemary that will likely be removed. They're both within the public right of way and they're fire hazardous. So in this case, both cypress and rosemary have a high surface area and they've got volatile oils in them. They both retain dead, highly flammable material, and they're very difficult to maintain. So if you go back to that list of fire hazardous plants, it really checks all the boxes. Bamboo, juniper, cypress, pampas grass, rosemary, those are really the big five that we often see in this environment that will be targeted for removal as a part of this project. Generally, native non-fire hazardous vegetation would not be removed as a part of this. It might be pruned or reduced in density if it was particularly large, but our goal here is absolutely not moonscaping our community. Our goal here is to target removal of species that we know to be hazardous and otherwise reduce the volume of material. So now that some of you have the bad news, I'd like to provide what I hope is some good news. So in places where we are removing vegetation altogether, we've partnered with East Bay Nursery, properties that reside behind vegetation that's fully removed. So properties where we assume that even though the vegetation was removed from the public right away, we figure folks have been maintaining it and caring for it. So in those cases, those properties will be able to go down, select from a list of fire-safe plants free of charge to replace what we've removed. We maintain a fairly comprehensive list of fire-safe plants on our website as well, which is berkeleyfiresafe.org. And one benefit of our list over some others out there is that it's also been screened to be both native to the area and pollinator friendly. So in true Berkeley fashion, I think we've got a pretty cool list for our community. And so even if we come through your area and don't remove any vegetation, and you're not eligible for the free replacement program, I'd encourage you to visit this list before you take your next trip down to the nursery. And a couple of key final points here about the logistics of this project. The contractor that we're working with does provide biomonitoring. So once sensitive species nesting season kicks off, which is usually in about March, and that's up to the biologist to determine, they'll be monitoring for these species as we move through the area to make sure that we're not disrupting any of these species or any of their habitats or nesting patterns. And then there's a traffic plan with this as well. So most of the work will not impede traffic flow, but where there is an impact, crews will be directing traffic or temporarily closing roads as needed. Very similar to other projects that you would see for road or utility work. But we anticipate that that work's going to be moving quickly enough that any impacts will be transient. The crew will be moving through the area probably before you notice. And while we're hoping not to impede traffic, it should not be for an extended period of time. So this is the plan for communicating the fire department's Grizzly Peak project to the public, especially Berkeley residents who will be directly affected by the work. We want to make sure that folks understand the goals and the scope of the work. We want to make sure that they're notified of the timeline for their work of the area and have the opportunity to sign up for more information and alerts. So one thing that folks will be getting is about a week before we come through, there'll be door hangers going on every door along the route. Those door hangers are going to give some information reminding folks about the project. And then there'll also be a couple options on there. So we're going to, if the plants in front of your property are scheduled for removal, we'll make sure that you've got contact information on there so that you can sign up to receive emails about when that replacement will happen. The agreement with East Bay Nursery is we're not just going to wander down there, but we will have an organized way that we can get folks down there to pick out vegetation. And then there'll also be contact information on there for folks that see their privacy hedges both being in the public right of way and anticipate that it would be flagged as a violation. There'll be an opportunity for you to reach out to connect with us to include that in the removal process so that you don't have to pay for it yourself later. And I've got one final thing for you since we all have you here tonight. I want to plug a couple things that are obviously ongoing in the Berkeley Fire Department. We've launched an ember-resistant mesh program that provides perhaps the single most effective home improvement to protect your home. It's currently open to especially high hazard areas and firewise communities, but we hope to expand it to others as we have the supply and ability to distribute. So please keep an eye out, check back to see if your neighborhood or your region is eligible. The second we've got the capacity, we're getting it out to folks. We also provide free appointment-based roadside chipping services to all properties in fire zones 2 and 3. If you haven't taken advantage of that, it's a really cool program. You chop down the vegetation, you leave it in your street, on the side of the street, on the agreed upon week, and we have folks come through and get rid of it for you. And we also provide a free one-time cleanup of the understory of eucalyptus trees. This is to mitigate the highest hazard that these trees create, which is the movement of fire across the ground and the ability for fire to climb up off the ground into the tree canopy using what are called ladder fuels. So if you haven't taken advantage of this one-time cleanup, it's a really cool program. You'll see down there at the bottom is an example on the left of what it looked like before and what it looked like after. And so we've, in situations like that, we've really mitigated the majority of risk that these trees create for at least a few years. One challenge here is that we help get you off the ground with that cleanup, but it is a one-time cleanup. So it's on you after that on private property to continue cleaning it up. We're also looking forward to launching more resident assistance programs this year as the funding becomes available. And all of this information can be found at berkeleyfiresafe.org. So I'd like to invite Councilmember Blackaby and Councilmember Keefe back to the presentation to help with questions, concerns, and some answers from us.
Great. Well, thank you, Colin. Super informative and exciting to see the work that's going to be started. So just a reminder, we've got about 137 odd people on the webinar. So a lot of folks here, a lot of interest. I'd encourage folks, if you've got a question, please click on that Q&A button at the bottom, type it in, and we will start going through those questions in written form. You can also click on the raise hand icon at the bottom, and Lori can call on you to ask your question, unmute you, turn on the camera, and you can ask the question in person. So either way, submit a written question in the Q&A or raise your hand and we'll call on you live. While we're waiting for questions, I do have one. And it's not a trick question, it's not a gotcha, not a hard one, but it's looking at the total kind of real estate that you're working on. Any estimates like how much, like what kind of volume are you thinking about? Like how much fuel is there? How much are you looking to remove kind of across all of those different streets and right-of-ways?
That's a great question. I'm always surprised by the numbers. Sometimes I look at some of the work that we do with the eucalyptus program and I think, oh, this is going to be, hundreds of cubic of yards of material, and it turns out to be not too much. So I hate to anticipate that. I do know as we go through Grizzly Peak Boulevard and Wildcat Canyon Road, there's a lot of work that encroaches on the right of way. I see a lot of overhanging trees that are sort of pushing cars into the median. I would expect that to remove a lot of fuel. If we make it down to La Loma, there's a fair amount of work along some of those retaining walls that I also think is going to be substantial and look substantially different. But it's also challenging. It's really hard to drive down these streets and see what's going to look different until you sort of go through and see it. One thing that I think is challenging for me too is that we're all so familiar with that it is a little bit nerve-wracking to look at it and sort of go, "Ooh, what's this going to look like when it looks different?" But I also think as we drive down some of these streets, regardless of how much fuel we pull out, it's really going to look like a breath of fresh air in some of these areas, and I actually think we're really going to enjoy it. That said, I don't live on Grizzly Peak Boulevard, so I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth who may not be as excited as I am.
Yeah. Well, I do, so I'm looking forward to that. It looks like no written question, but we have a number of questions in the raised hand. So Lori, do you want to kind of walk us through these questions?
Sure. The first question is from Miranda Worthen. Miranda, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, I think there's nothing in the Q&A because it says the host has turned off Q&A is my first kind of point of procedure.
Thank you.
And then I actually have two questions. So one question is about trees that are on the verge. I live on Indian Rock Avenue, which is not on the list, but um, I've been told in the past that the city owns the trees on the verge and we can't remove the trees or trim them. And I'm wondering what the rules are. We have a very large bay laurel that is very much in the power lines. And I just wonder what I, as a homeowner, can do to support the community's fire resilience. And then the second question is really for my husband, who's been really skeptical of the data on the 0 to 5 feet zone stuff that we've been getting. When he looks out the window, he says there's trees everywhere, like all around on our neighbors' properties. How would it help our safety, to remove, like, say, a small apple tree or that's up closer to the house? And so I'm wondering if you can share some of that evidence for us.
Miranda, those are great questions. As we get started here, I also want to invite the Fire Chief, Dave Sprague, and retired Assistant Fire Chief, Chris Pinto, into the panel too, because by all means, there's a breadth of information here, and I'm not going to be able to represent all of it. In answer to your first question, with trees that are on the verge, oof, that's a tricky one. I know we've got a Parks Department that is really invested in trying to manage the trees that they know are theirs. When it's right on the line like that, I don't have a good answer for that question other than to bring it back to your council member and see if they can get Parks to come out and meet with you to really establish ownership or a plan. Beyond that, Chief, I don't know if you've got more to add on that before I went into
Yeah, I
these
think it's a
areas.
great question. I live in Berkeley too, and I've never gotten the answer to that question, but I don't think I've ever asked. So I'm texting the PRW director now to see if I can get one before the end of the webinar.
And
Well, that's awesome.
I think I'm your council person, so please reach out to my office and we can help you with the process.
And Miranda, I mean, what a great teaser to
That looks like it was going to be a great.
but what
Oh, there you are.
what's that?
Sound like a toss to the chief coming.
Yeah.
Miranda, I'll pick up. So the zone 0, we have a ton of information, and we're going to try to explain over the course of the next several weeks, culminating with the special city council meeting on February 11th, all the science behind that. And that's not an uncommon position, so I think we don't have enough time nor the materials prepared to dive into that tonight, but definitely hear that question. It's something we're going to address via some information we're pushing to council members, and then in the presentation at 2:11, which I encourage you and your husband to watch.
Thank you.
Great. So before I go to the next question, I want to say the Q&A has been turned back on. Sorry for that mistake. So I see a number of people are asking Q&A questions. We'll continue with the verbal questions and we'll give Chief Pinto a moment to look over the written ones. The next question is from Rebecca Mills. Rebecca, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. And thank you for this listening session. I have a couple of questions. I live on Wildcat Canyon, and my neighbor and I are very concerned about the connection between the live oaks on the park side to our live oaks. And I'm wondering, can we speak with anyone ahead of this process to discuss what we're concerned about? I recognize that that might not be possible, but it would be very a pleasant thing for us to be able to do. And I gather the trees on the park side of Wildcat Canyon, if they're on the edge between Central Park Drive and Wildcat, I'm right there at the Lake Anza turnoff, they belong to Berkeley. That's been a very big question for us in trying to deal with the trees that are reaching over and touching the foliage of our trees.
Rebecca, great question. If my internet cuts out here again, I'm sure someone will pick up for me. But my understanding is that Wildcat Canyon is the city line. Once you get down to Central Park Drive, you're very much in East Bay Regional Parks land. I would love to hear about your concern. Live oaks are obviously a difficult subject for us here in Berkeley, just because there's a local ordinance that sort of restricts how much work we can do. And then we don't control the trees, obviously, over in East Bay Regional Parks. But if you could email us at firesafe@berkeleyca.gov, and walk me through what some of your concerns are. I'd love to be able to reach back out and see if there's something we can do as a part of this project. I know that Parks is also up on Wildcat Canyon Road at the same time we are. They're specifically looking at a very specific tree type up there and doing work there. But obviously, I don't think live oak is one of them. But if there's something we can do as a part of this project, I'd love to hear about it.
Okay, and just to clarify, those trees aren't at Central Park Drive, they're at Wildcat. So they're within 5 feet of the edge of, so they're probably within the PROW on the park side. Then would they be Berkeley? That it just would, we will email you. I'll get together with Francesca and we'll send you something soon.
That'd be
Thank
great. And if you could just send me a specific location or even a photo of the trees, that would also really help us figure out if there's anything else we can do as a part of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, the next question is from Carol Curtis. Oh, well, I guess it's from Vivian Fendel. You can unmute yourself, Vivian. You're still muted.
I think this is probably out of the scope of what we're really talking about here today, but because we've talked about egress and ingress, is there any thought of closing some of well, I guess I don't know the days that are high fire danger days, is there any thought of closing parts like the park, like South Park or part of Grizzly, or to avoid having an accident happen on those days where we've been told if you can evacuate now, even though nothing's happening, you should try to do so. So with that in mind, does that fit into the whole thought pattern here?
Yeah, Vivian, that's a great question. I know that on the extreme fire weather days and on certain days like 4th of July, we've normally communicated pretty well with East Bay Regional Parks and the City of Oakland. We've, at least on the 4th of July, we've closed Grizzly Peak Boulevard altogether. The Parks District is often closed on those extreme fire weather days. I know this because I wasn't paying attention once and then had to find something else to do with my kids for a couple hours. Beyond that, I don't think we close them on the routine red flag days, but those extreme days, there is limited access up there. We're also waiting on the results of that evacuation time study that is due to council, I believe, in April or May. And that may also give us some better ammunition to understand where folks are at certain times of the day, and that might help inform future action.
Thank you.
All right, now it's time for Carol Curtis. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, it looks like you're not recording this, am I correct? Usually you see something say it's being recorded.
We are recording this.
You are, okay, wonderful. Yeah. So is that easily made available to us? How do we access this recording in the future?
We will send links to everybody who registered. We had over 300 people register, but it will take us a little time to have it ready. So you could look at it, maybe look out for it by the end of next week.
And even beyond that, I'm sure Shoshana and I will be putting it in newsletters to people who didn't RSVP for this. So we want to get it out far and wide.
Okay, great. And just to clarify, so my understanding is in terms of us individual property owners, we should expect to get a door hanger that tells when this work is going to happen. And does it also say what is going to specifically happen on our property so that we have the ability to respond in some way? Or could you
so
that whole process?
Absolutely. So the whole project is taking place only in the public right of way. So it's not it shouldn't ever come onto actual private property. With that said, the door hanger is going to let you know the anticipated date that we will have crews there. It's not specific, obviously, because some vegetation work might take longer than others, but the crew should move through fairly efficiently, so there shouldn't be much of an inconvenience. The door hanger is also going to have a couple options on the back, and one of them is going to be letting you know that we do anticipate removing vegetation, not just pruning, but actually removing certain species. If that box is checked, there's a way to connect with us there so that you can get on the email list to learn about the replacement project. And then the other option there will be a way to get in touch with us if you do have vegetation that is acting as a privacy screen in what we believe to be the right of way, to give you the opportunity to have us remove that now before it becomes a violation in the future.
Okay, so yeah, I guess like, so if there's a hedge that's like right up against the roadway, is that likely something that has to be completely removed?
If there's a hedge that is in the public right of way, that at some point, yes, that likely has to be removed. One of the challenges that we're running into is that hedges, when they're being used for privacy, suddenly we're starting to talk about privacy concerns in the Fourth Amendment, and we want this project to move through the community and be as effective as possible. So we're also using this project as an opportunity to identify where some of those are, so that we can work with homeowners down the road to let them know. Because once it's become a privacy issue, then it also counts as maybe going on private property. So we're trying to navigate a fairly difficult bureaucratic process. But yeah, if it's right up against the road, my guess is it's probably in the public right of way, and at some point you are going to have to remove it.
Okay, so it might not happen when you come through, but you might alert that property owner to the fact that, hey, this is going to have to be removed, or at your next inspection, this is going to be a violation, is what you're saying.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. In fact, if it is a privacy hedge, so if we can't see you through the hedge, then it won't be removed as a part of this project. But it will likely, we will flag it and let you know that down the road it might potentially present a challenge for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Chief Sprague, your hand is up. Did you want to say something?
Yes, I got an answer on the trees in between the sidewalk and the street from the Parks and Rec director. He says residents can be given permission to maintain the tree if they would like to, and I have a link to the form that you can fill out and hire an arborist to do so. But generally, the Parks Department likes to do that work, and all you need to do is call 311 to initiate a service request.
Great, thank you. We have two more raised hands we're going to do, and then we'll go to the written ones. We might go back to raised hands if we have time. So Michael Schnitzer is the next person to ask your question.
Hello. Colin, is there any plan to put trees down in Tilden Park? There's a forest which I expect would easily crown and produce the kind of projectile fuel that we're all concerned about. Where are you with that? Or where's the Park Service with that?
That's a great question, Michael. Part of that February 11th presentation, we also want to update folks about some of the work that's happening in the parks. But Chief, I wonder if you might just talk briefly about the partnership with Chief Deal and what's going on there.
Yeah, sure. So obviously the parks manages a huge number of acres. We lobby them just like every other community on the border does for vegetation management. They do have a vegetation management plan that has been approved through the CEQA process. There's been lawsuits, so they have to follow that pretty strictly. It does involve a lot of vegetation management, both thinning, understory, removal of trees along the edges of Berkeley, and you can see that work if you walk on the paths and trails there. Clearly, there's still a lot to do, and the challenges are from their perspective. Most of that work is grant funded, and the work never ends. Right, it's a cycle that's going to have to be continued forever. So We continue to advocate for that work to occur along our border. And beyond that, I think one thing that is important to me, I've thought a lot about this, and I think it's just while that presents a part of the hazard, if you look at Lahaina, that was a grass fire.
Right.
Look at Los Angeles, that was coyote brush. So even in the absence of, a forest, when we have those wind-driven wildfires, they can easily transition to structure-to-structure spread, which is why that zone zero and the home hardening is such a critical piece. Not to downplay at all the necessity of the work that needs to happen in the park.
I also saw there's a project coming up this spring for the Little Farm area. So
Yeah.
granted, it's not a widespread thing, but they're taking another bite this spring.
Great.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
the last verbal question for now is from Joan McQuarrie. And you can unmute yourself.
Okay, hi. I came in late. I wanted to know if you had talked about parking on one side of the street only during red flag days. I understand that Susan worked on this for a long time, and they do it in New York, they do it in the East with snow, so I would love to see us be able to do that. Brent, you're smiling.
Brent, you want to
The
take it?
chief, yeah, the chief and Shoshana and Colin and I, like, there are a whole, and you're right, like, and Susan has been a huge driver of all this for the past a number of years. You're going to see a lot coming up at this February 11th meeting. This is the time. We know this is the time that we need to move on a lot of this. And I think we're going to have the willingness and interest amongst a broad cross section of people here in District 5 and District 6 to do some of this tough work and make some of these sacrifices. And so these are some of the things that we'll be discussing and doing. Some more red striping, more limiting of parking to one side of the street or the other. Considering, the chief talks a lot about not just red flag days, but extreme fire weather days, right? There's a distinction about when these events are more likely to occur. And on those extreme days, being very, very aggressive about limiting parking and making sure that those egress and ingress points are available. So yes, this is all coming, and the chief has organized a really smart plan about this that you're going to be seeing a lot more about between now and the 11th of February. And this is an important part of that. I'll also just say, because the chief has drilled into me, another big part of the evacuation plan is the pre-evacuation, right? So there's whatever happens in an event itself, but on those extreme fire days, one of the keys to successful evacuation and emergency is also getting people out of the hills in advance of an emergency situation. So that's also part of the answer here.
And I'll tee off the council member and say the consultant that is doing the evacuation time study actually questioned how much of a difference would it make for us to do a substantial amount of additional red curbing. And so they're looking into that question specifically from a modeling perspective, which will just be a piece of what we use to move forward. But I think, pragmatically, if you think about some of the 12-foot wide roads that we have, if we limit parking and gain another 5 feet, when we have a scenario where we have a mass evacuation and people are, whether you're looking at the videos from 1991 Berkeley Oakland Hills Fire or the videos from a couple weeks ago in LA, people stack up their vehicles. They become frightened, disoriented because of smoke, fire, ember storms. And really, I'm not sure how much of we're interested to find out from the study how much of a difference red curbing would actually make. That said, I think one thing that we're working with Councilmember Blackaby's office on now is some type of restriction that can go into effect during high fire danger days. That to me makes sense as a first step. It's a low impact to the community. And if it makes a difference, that's great. So we recognize there's huge impacts to those decisions, and I don't want to make them without knowing that it's really going to help.
I have just one follow-up question. How many feet of clearance do you need to get your equipment through?
We need 10 feet 5 inches.
Thank you. So thank you both and all.
All right, Chief Pinto, I hand it over to you for the written questions.
Okay. My name's Chris Pinto, and I'm looking through the written questions, and I'm trying to take the earlier questions that we received, especially the ones related to the fuel work in the PRW, the public right of way. And the first question I have is, what will be done about wood fences built into the public right of way? And Colin and the chief kind of alluded to that already, but I'll open it up to Colin to answer that if you like.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Removing fences is not a part of this project. They do, however, wooden fences obviously do they are cause for concern in the presence of a wildfire. Those would fall under the same category as the privacy hedge. So as we're coming through the project, looking at probably for the first time in a long time what the public right of way is along some of these roads, when we encounter improvements to the land, such as a fence that we reasonably believe are probably in the public right of way, we'll tag that property, and we're going to go back and sit down with some other city staff that are better versed in this and establish where those violations actually are. In terms of vegetation, like privacy hedges, that would probably come out as the next defensible space report. If you've actually got a fence that was constructed inside the public right of way, you wouldn't be hearing from us. You'd probably be hearing from a different city agency down the road. But we're going to mark them as this project, but they're not going to be removed as a part of the Grizzly Peak project.
And the next question is about the plant list. We're getting a couple questions, and people want to know about the safe plant list, how to access it, where they can find it on the Berkeley Fire Safe website, which is where you can find it, Berkeley Fire Safe website. And also, will they be planted for those people, and will the roots of the existing vegetation be removed? We're getting questions around that.
Yeah, thanks. I noticed Councilmember Blackaby dropped the link to the plant list in the chat, responding to one person, so you can see it there. You're absolutely right. It's on the Berkeley Fire Safe website. It's a bit buried at the moment. It's under the defensible space tab, and then additional resources. It's way down there at the bottom. So we'll try to promote it a little bit more so that it's a little bit easier to find on the website, but it is in there. As for the roots, we will make an effort to pull the roots as we move through if it's not going to damage the vegetation around it, and it's not going to impede the crew's progress too much. So we don't want to spend a long time working on root balls if we can be moving through the neighborhood. But if we can get it out with the plant safely without damaging the surrounding vegetation, we'll give it a shot. And then replanting the plants, unfortunately, no, we don't have a program or the ability to come through and actually do the planting. We turn that over to you. One of the benefits there is that if we remove it in one area of your house and you go, great, I didn't like that one anyway, those plants can be used anywhere. So you can take them back into another part of your property and enjoy a free plant on the Berkeley Fire Department that you can look at through your back window. We would encourage you to not plant it within the first 5 feet of your structure, but yeah, you would have to plant it back on your own.
Thank you for that, Chief Arnold. Next, we're getting some questions about the right-of-way itself, and people are curious how it's established. Or I think what we should maybe touch is, how can they determine where that public right-of-way is in their front yard, where the line is?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Chris, I know you and I have spent a lot of time working through this. There's some areas where it's fairly obvious on the planning maps with the city. Grizzly Peak is one example. The nice thing about Grizzly Peak is it's also fairly clear because there's a sidewalk, because there's power lines or power poles, that those are obviously all within the right of way. We're going to look at that map and take a conservative approach. We don't ever want to cross that line, but we're going to take advantage of obvious areas. in a lot of our streets, it can also be the edge of the street, especially the smaller streets. Most of those streets, the edge of the street actually is the right of way. The best guidance I have for you is take a look as you walk through your neighborhood. Look for utility poles. Look for utility covers. So where East Bay Mud has shutoffs in the side of your street, is a great example of where the public right of way is.
Okay. And the next question, what if if one of the property owners in the Grand area is traveling, when the door tag arrives, notifying that we're going to come through, can they sign up to receive email notifications as well? Maybe 1 week isn't much notice is what they're indicating. So I think about the notifications, we should touch on that a bit more.
Yeah. So they'll be like we mentioned, it would be about a week ahead of time. It might be as much as 2 weeks ahead of time that door hanger goes in. There's some information on the back about reaching back out to us. I would really encourage you to work with your neighbors. Let them know that you're going to be out of town. This project is coming through. They're going to get a door hanger too. They could respond on your behalf and support you if you've got specific information that you want us to know. If you look out in your front yard and you see some juniper or some cypress there in the sidewalk, that's a pretty good indication that we're going to be doing some work there. So having your neighbor grab your door hanger and respond on your behalf would be one option. Yeah.
I have a couple more questions, or maybe three more here, it looks like, I'm taking some of these questions and grouping them together for time's sake, just so our audience knows that. The next one, we're hearing there's a problem with lack of parking control on our narrow streets, and we've touched on this already. And what are the plans to increase parking control, such as red curbing? I think you've already touched on this, but I don't know if you want to add anything or if we should move on.
Councilmember Blackaby?
I'll just say, echo the chief. This is all completely in scope with what we're working on February 11th and what will come after that, decisions the council will be making. But I agree with the chief, again, using a data-driven approach and making sure that we're doing things that are actually solve the problem. And again, pre-evacuation is a big part of this answer, not just what happens during an evacuation, which again is important, but it's also pre-evacuation, what we do ahead of time. But yeah, we're working on a referral right now on red curbing and making sure we have easier egress and ingress on the small streets.
Okay, I'm just scanning the questions. Give me just a quick sec here and see if I can pull one more out. Quick measure speed. Well, there's a question here. It's kind of long. It's about vegetation. And if the trees are trimmed, a person's asking, they have grown a tree that has grown to a height of perhaps 15 or 20 feet, and they've been planning to top them or perhaps to 8 or 10 feet in order to maintain privacy screen while providing a better view of the house. If the trees are trimmed 8 feet from the ground or trimmed to produce a space of 10 foot or more between the crowns, the trees will be, there'll be no trees left at all. So I think they have a privacy screen and they're worried we're going to limit up and destroy their privacy screen. I think that's the basis of the question.
Yeah, great question. I think we touched on it in the slide. We're gonna create spacing between trees, and if it's on horizontal land, it's ideally 10 feet between trees. But also important is that we're not gonna limb or separate trees to the point where it would otherwise damage the tree. So if you've got two trees that are 10 feet apart, one would be pretty funny looking to have two trunks with just a bunch of vegetation on one side. But we are going to try to produce separation where we can without affecting the health of the tree.
And I think that's it. I would say there seems to be a lot of, in the comments, there seems to be positive, and people are even asking how we can get funds to do more. So I would close with that. And thank you for the questions.
I have two more questions that are verbal. If the group's, yeah, okay with it? Okay,
Sure.
Richard Ilgene, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, yeah. Years ago, I recall Chief Sprague before one of I think the Disaster Commission talked about removing eucalyptus trees. And he said, I think they said something to the effect that I didn't realize it was going to be so hard. There are there are hundreds of eucalyptus trees around the area around Wildcat, mostly on private property. And the Sierra Club and I think on the Marin fire safe site, it says these are considered a hazardous species. I guess what's being done to deal with them? I think years ago you said you needed an EIR analysis to do that. I don't know if that's been started because certainly this was more than I think about 5 years ago. It could have been done by now and completed, so they could be removed. I have a couple other questions that I'll mention them so you may respond to them. One of the issues in the LA fires were the lack of water, that they're running short on water. And I know I've mentioned this before, the department about there's a water tank down off Wildcat that is empty, and supposedly because it's leaking. And I know, and also there have been some concerns that the reservoir on Spruce could be increased in water capacity. So I'm wondering what's being done, with the water capacity in the area to improve that, so we don't have that problem also.
Sure, Richard. Those are great questions. I'll sort of give an overview of what we're doing currently with eucalyptus and the water system, and then I'll turn it over to Chief Sprague to talk about the long range plans for EIRs and some of the regional work that's going into the CEQA work. That vegetation cleanup program where we're cleaning up the understory of the trees, eucalyptus absolutely pose a fire hazard. Probably the most likely hazard that they pose is the movement of ground fuel through the duff that falls off the tree and gathers on the ground, and then that fire transitioning up into the tree. So one of the things that we've worked with private property owners is doing a full cleanup of anywhere where there's a eucalyptus tree to clean up the understory and limb them up so that there's there's less likelihood of ladder fuels. That really helps prevent fire from transitioning into the crowns. I was talking to a fire ecologist at UC Davis yesterday, and he brought up a really interesting concept, which is that, you could get crown fires, but my big concern is what happens when that crown fire transitions back to a ground fire near the homes. That's when it becomes most threatening. And so that's really where we focused our prevention efforts. As for the water system, I think we're all watching that come out of LA. For those that studied or remember the Bel Air fire, which I think was in the late 60s, they had the same problem. A lot of times when you're trying to fight fire at a higher elevation, you have a reduced pressure and reduced volume abilities. It is something that when you've got a wildfire conflagration with winds moving 100 miles an hour, you're going to tap just about any system. And it's going to be a challenge under those conditions anywhere. Here in Berkeley, I can tell you, we've got our water in a series of different zones stratified throughout the hills. Here in Berkeley, we have a unique ability to pump water between those zones so that we can support one zone over another. We've also got a 3,000-gallon water tender here in the city that we can deploy. And then we've also got the above ground water system, which is a system that allows us to pump water from the bay directly up into the city to support firefighting efforts. All of this is to say that those are really effective efforts when we're talking about your average wildland urban interface wildfire. One of the challenges from LA is those are truly exceptional conditions with those wind speeds. I don't know of a water system that could handle trying to fight that fire from the ground under those conditions. But with that said, I'm really proud of the work that we've gotten, and obviously we're continuing to look at it. I don't know what's going on with the Woods Reservoir right now, other than East Bay mud. Doesn't seem to need it for water supply, but that is a really good question. Chief, I wonder if you've got more info on where we're headed with the eucalyptus work.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think what we've landed on, as I stated earlier, is that eucalyptus trees and Italian cypress, acacia, all these fire-prone species that are non-native, they do pose a higher fire risk, especially if their understory is not managed. But they're a piece of the puzzle, and Lahaina, LA underscore that you don't need all that fuel. A grass fire, a coyote brush fire can just as easily transmit and cause a structure-structure conflagration. So those are the eucalyptus program is now in terms of what the city's going to do. The EIR, the environmental work that has to be done, is being coordinated through the East Bay Regional Wildfire Committee. So it's going to be a regional approach, and hopefully we'll all get the CEQA exemption to be able to do that work. Even when we get the exemption, I don't see us going and clear cutting all the eucalyptus trees. I think it's a thinning effort and a maintenance effort that plays into overall reduction of the risk. The real focus for us again is, it's really challenging, but it's implementing zone zero and home hardening. Those are the things that are going to stop ignition of vegetation around our home and our homes themselves, no matter what the vegetation is around our homes.
Great. We have a couple more questions. Lori Perlstadt. Go. Oh, unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi there. I didn't know you were doing this live. I just wanted to ask, I was looking at the plant list and it doesn't look like there's any cactus on there. And my understanding is those are a really good choice for fire resistance. So is that true? And should those be added?
Yeah, Laura, that's a great question. As I mentioned, the list was designed to sort of be non-native and pollinator friendly. And I am not a biologist, but my guess is there may not be a number of native cactus here to the East Bay Hills. With that said, my understanding, yes, is that most of them are fairly fire resistant, as are most succulents. I would think when you go down and you talk to some of these nurseries, they can probably provide you better guidance than a firefighter. I would say that, the one word of caution anytime you're talking about that is that even that type of vegetation, when it's within the first 5 feet of the home, can still pose a hazard, but it's not on the list because probably it wasn't native to the East Bay Hills. You can look at firesafemarin.org. Monterey also has a fire safe plant list, so you can go out and expand and find some other plants that might meet your needs that aren't quite tailored to the two things that we tried to be unique about.
And you can find, you can reference sources that rate plants by low, medium, and high fire. So if you're interested in a plant that's not on the list that we provide, and you look it up and it's a moderate or low fire danger plant, then that's appropriate. But I would say what Chief Arnold said is in zone zero, it's best to keep vegetation out of there altogether. What we've learned.
Okay, last question from Michelle Fauti.
Thank you very much. Going back very quickly on the water question, I know of 2, maybe 3 reservoirs that are able to serve the Berkeley Ridge, which is where we have about 15 Firewise neighborhoods right now. The largest one used to be Summit, but if you remember in 2014, they took down the capacity of Summit from 27 million gallons to a measly 3.5. And so if you add the total capacity, that's actually within a height that it can be quickly pumped to service the needs of a fire crew that would be essentially above on the other side of Grizzly. There's not a heck of a lot that's actually accessible at an altitude that's very sufficient. Is there any consideration to maybe increase the amount of water that's going to be available high up, basically at 1,000 above, and maybe reverse or increase some of the amount of water available at Summit?
Michelle, great question. I don't know. I think after LA, we've tried to start a couple of conversations, or we are starting a couple of conversations with the district. One thing that I'm really curious to learn about is whether we have the capacity to change the volume in water there when we expect high fire danger. There's a huge network of things that we do when these red flag or high fire danger conditions come in. There's a lot of mechanisms that get spooled up. We've traditionally relied on East Bay Mud to make sure that their side of the house is ready, and they've traditionally done a really good job. I don't know why they reduced the volume. I don't know if they, it's about water becoming stagnant or volume or need or what, but we do have a couple of phone calls out, and we're looking to have a better partnership so that when those types of days occur, we can support that in whatever way possible.
Colin, at the time, the reason they gave for this was that they didn't need all of that water, and they needed to be able to upgrade the level of purification of the water, and they were able to provide the amount of water, the required amount of water pressure with essentially 10 times less water. But if you notice, and by the way, their web page is still up. I checked before this meeting here from 2014. But if you notice, none of that involves fire availability there.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think when their public information officer and I sit down, that's probably will be the number one question. I appreciate that. That's really good feedback. I think it's been helpful for us to move forward.
A couple other things real quick. I just noticed in the written chat just before, I know we have a little more time before we go. There's one question about personal water, personal resident fire hydrants, sprinklers, pros and cons of that. Is that part of the strategy, part of the plan, cost benefit of that?
Well, that's a great question. I've got family members asking me the same question right now, that are, what's it worth to put this sprinkler system on my roof? I don't know that we have post-incident analysis of those systems, those residential systems working effectively. We don't have enough evidence to suggest that they are really effective. It's not to say that they're not. I think there's a lot of things that go into that. The speed of the fire really affects the amount of BTUs or the amount of heat released. And small sprinkler systems could pale in comparison to some of the heat that comes through. With that said, they may also be effective against some other types of fire. One thing that I think is critically important is that it's important. It's really important to not overlook the reality that you can either try to put the fire out with water, or you can eliminate the fuel around your home so that fire can't burn. Fire is either going to use fuel to burn, or it's going to be extinguished with water. And one of those things, there's a lot of evidence suggesting the ability for those first 5 feet. And I think you probably touched on that when my internet froze, but sprinklers are probably pretty good at eliminating fire coming towards your house, but 90% of these homes are being ignited from embers, and that's embers hitting the side of the building, dropping and igniting stuff in the first 5 feet of the home. So as I'm telling members of my family, sure, if you want to develop a residential system, but don't do it before you take care of those first 5 feet, because that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Great. And then some other questions on undergrounding, PG&E's role, recognizing the cost expense and the long timelines for doing that. Is that, again, part of the plan, or PG&E's role in these high fire hazard weather days?
Yeah, great question. Because of the PSPS, the power safety shutoffs that now occur when we have those extreme fire weather conditions, PG&E's got a pretty advanced team of meteorologists that are pinpointing areas where they're shutting power off to limit the chance of ignition from their power lines. That is one way of essentially mitigating that risk. With that said, as we talked about earlier in the presentation, one of our main concerns is a fire starting east of us and then blowing into our community. So undergrounding our power lines here in Berkeley would not prevent that from happening. I don't have a good answer for the undergrounding of power lines east of us as they run through the Park District. Dave, or Chief, I'm not sure if you've got a better answer there in terms of that. I don't know if they do PSPSs for the the high tension lines over there.
Yeah, it's a great question, obviously relevant after LA that I will ask.
Great.
Undergrounding is extremely expensive, but it would be really helpful for the for incident management in itself. Think of yourself as a firefighter going into these neighborhoods with these high voltage lines over your head. It's much safer to fight the fire with undergrounded utilities as well. You'll get less fire starts in the wind events. One of the things PG&E is doing now as a stopgap, and it's pretty effective, is they're putting in wind sensors that shut the power off in wind events, so that you might get a sudden power outage in your neighborhood, but it's because you had a surge of wind. So they're installing those now as well.
Just to add, Brent and I are both on the East Bay Regional Wildfire Committee, and Brent, I'm sure you'll agree, I think we should bring that up at the next meeting. And I'd like to find out the answers about that too. So thank you for the question.
Chief Sprague, real quick, I noticed this is a preview for where things are coming because some people are already kind of seeing some of the new program that you're pulling together. Someone's asking a little bit about the Zone 4 proposal, about the possibilities. Anyway, if we do have a little time, maybe if you want to sketch out a little bit of that.
Yeah, thank you. So it's become very clear to us that there are key vulnerabilities that Paradise, Lahaina, LA, Coffee Park in Santa Rosa, and many other urban communities share that allow a wind-driven vegetation fire to transmit into the urban community and start that structure-to-structure firestorm. Once that structure-to-structure firestorm starts, until the wind changes direction or dies down, we're not going to stop it. We can control it to a certain extent and save certain homes and focus on getting people out of the way. But our goal, what all the science suggests, is the best possibility of us slowing that transition down, and that transition is the key. Transition from the vegetative fire to the structure-to-structure fire. So if we can slow that transition down by strategically implementing Zone 0 and home hardening to create a buffer area between the community and the highest risk area that we anticipate a fire coming from, which is from the Park District, that gives us the best chance to, one, have fewer structure fires that ignite when the fire approaches the city limits, two, to amass more firefighting resources from around the region, and three, to provide more time for the police department and the fire department to evacuate residents. The way that we reduce the number of structures that burn, and this is scientifically validated over and over and over again, we have some really cool live post analysis to show you of this actually being effective, is through that Zone 0 work and the rest of the defensible space on our property, and by hardening homes. All but 50 homes in Fire Zone 2 and 3 were built before 2008, well before 2008. They are literally the driest fuel, the most ignitable fuel in the community. So we have to figure out a way to address this issue. It's very complicated. It's expensive in some ways, but our plan is to present a package of proposals for council and the community to consider on the 11th that I think really clearly map out the challenge that all these communities have faced, including Berkeley and Oakland in 1991. What we know today is the best set of mitigations and programs and policies that we can put in place based on lived experience, historical fire activity, and the really robust amount of science that has gone into researching these types of fires. We're gonna bring it all forward. We haven't before because quite honestly, there wasn't the appetite for it. And we've seen that play out in other jurisdictions around us that have tried to bring these policies forward. And this is not an exaggeration. The pro to con public comments are 8 to 1. the other way, 8 being on the con side. So my feeling, I just our team, we can't responsibly not bring this forward anymore. I know it's going to be contentious. There will be people opposed and people supporting, but it feels right now like if there was a moment in time where people are open to this, maybe even asking for it, it's now. So that's what we're bringing forward on the 11th. We're really excited about it. And the team's just putting an incredible amount of work along with all the council members to put this together. So did I miss anything? You guys?
No, I'm also really excited to present it. I'm obviously nervous because I know it's the right thing to do, but I know that it's a big ask for our community. But I'm also, like you said, we put a ton of research and time into making sure that we're presenting the absolute best information. So it should be an interesting event for sure. Councilmember Blackaby, I think we probably have time for one more question before we wrap it up for the day.
Okay, Carol Curtis.
Yes, I was just curious in terms of home hardening. It's so expensive to totally replace one siding, obviously. But are there any products or are there any paints that really are truly helpful in terms of, slowing or resisting fire?
Great question. There are some products on the market. One of them is actually developed by somebody who lives in Berkeley, that has just come on the market in the last year. That is effective in the testing they've done. It is publicly available. The challenge is, if I'm remembering correctly, is there's 2 products. One protects against radiant heat and one protects against embers. But there's not one that does both yet, is my recollection. In any case, we will find that link and we will send it out as part of the information that comes out after this webinar to everybody that attended. It would be a great intermediate step.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chief. Carol, great question. Couple of closing points here. One, once this webinar is available, along with the council members posting it where it makes sense for them, we can also load it up onto the Berkeley Fire Safe website, so it'll be available there. Folks that have additional questions, they can email firesafe@berkeleyca.gov. That's firesafe@berkeleyca.gov. I'd be happy to reach back out to you regarding this project or anything else that is on your mind. I want to thank everybody for their time. I want to thank the great questions, engaged community. These presentations are awesome because it's you all really care, and that's really cool to see. Council members, I'll turn it back to you, and thanks for hosting this tonight and for giving us the floor.
Thank you so much, Colin. And once again, thank you to all of you in the community who came out. I can really feel how much you care and how seriously you're taking this, and that makes me feel better about the whole thing. This is very scary, but we are in this together. So thank you so much for your wonderful questions and for coming. And thank you to Councilmember Blackaby for co-hosting and our staff. And most of all, thank you to Chiefs Sprague, Arnold, and Pinto for everything you do, the presentation and all the rest.
Thanks.
Brent, anything?
Anna, and I have a feeling we'll be doing a few more of these. So this is a good opportunity to do this. And I think, bringing District 5, District 6 together, we have a lot of shared interest in tackling this problem and bringing the neighborhoods together. And so again, I think a testament, I was looking at the numbers, we've still got 100+ people online after an hour and a half talking about fire. So it is a real sign of the interest and engagement of the community. So thanks to you, Shoshana. Thanks to the fire department. We have an amazing department, and there is much more coming. So again, stay tuned for the February 11th special council meeting. That will be kind of the next step, and then consideration over the subsequent weeks of what we're actually going to do and in what order and how to fund it. So that's a big priority for Shoshana and me. Reach out to me anytime, bblackaby@berkeleyca.gov. Shoshana is SOKeefe@berkeleyca.gov. And love to be in touch to answer any other questions. So I think that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.